Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'll now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly. We're here today to discuss AM 552-2024 Executive Appointment Confirmation Hearing. Sean Case, Chief of Police. We'll go ahead and do introductions.
Mark Littlefield.
Zach Johnson.
Meg Zalato.
Christopher Constant on the phone. Mr. Solt.
Randy Solt here.
Thanks, Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez.
Present.
We have Mr. Case, Chief Case. Now, traditionally, we would have someone from the administration do a brief introduction. I will assume, because we have a long history working with you, that we can proceed without that. So why don't you, by way of introduction to the record, tell us about yourself and give us a couple minutes of introduction.
My name is Sean Case, and I'll try to keep it brief on the intro. I have the boss is here.
All right, so we'll roll the wheels back. Welcome, Mayor LaFrance. We'll get you a name tag up. And so I was just saying that normally we have an introduction from the administration, but that we know Sean, so we're going to dive in, our Chief Case. And so with that, though, welcome, Mayor LaFrance. We welcome you to make a brief introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the Assembly. Apologies for being late. Chief Case previously served as Deputy Chief of the Anchorage Police Department for 2 years and previously served as a captain for 6 years. He has been with APD for over 23 years. Chief Case brings strong APD leadership experience at a time when that experience is particularly critical. Chief Case has a master's degree in criminology from Indiana State University, a master's degree in the psychology of leadership from Pennsylvania State University, and a graduate of the FBI National Academy. He is a national trainer and speaker on critical issues, including use of force and force investigations, internal affairs operations, and documenting and evaluating training. Chief Case has worked with multiple police departments nationwide to develop effective and impartial police policies. He is a board member of a nonprofit victims advocate group. In a short time on the job, Chief Case has already produced an update to APD's body-worn camera policy and demonstrated a strong commitment to improving relations between APD and the community. I am grateful for his leadership experience, willingness to serve in this tough and very important job, and his commitment to this work and to our community.
Thank you. Chief Case. Chief Case, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank the body for this opportunity to come forward and spend a little time to talk about some of my vision for the police department and answer your questions that you may have. I think just as an intro, I'll say that there's a couple of things that are at the top of our priority list as we move forward. The first is violent crime and how we respond to kind of the ever-changing landscape of violent crime. We've seen a little bit of an increase in the violent crime here in Anchorage, and so that's the top priority. Homelessness is something that we've been working through as a municipality for the last couple of years. If you look at the data, I think we're on the right trajectory. I think we have some of the relationships citywide and with some of our nonprofits that we're headed in the right direction. And the police department's going to add some resources that are going to focus on homelessness. And then third and final area is communication. I think we've gotten off to a good start thus far with increasing our communication, not only with the community, but with our elected body. And we're going to continue that communication in the future.
Thank you very much. Ms. Alatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make a quick disclosure. As the Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness and the holder of the Street Outreach Grant through the Health Department for the municipality, I want to disclose that we work closely with the Community Action Policing team, particularly around abatements. And I do have conversations with Chief Case in that particular context, but the Community Action Policing contact we actually have is as a sergeant within the department. So I will avoid discussing the issue of homelessness in today's confirmation hearing, but I think I otherwise have plenty of other questions and interests for the municipality to participate.
Yeah, I agree. In this case, it is a matter of supreme importance that every member that is able to participate participates in this conversation because the substantive nature, it affects all aspects of municipal life. So the determination in this case is, other than discussions about homelessness, you are not conflicted. And you have a question?
Great, thank you. Welcome, Chief Case. So my question is, when you were announced as Chief of Police by the mayor, you talked a little bit about approaches to policing that don't necessarily involve arrest. And I know you and I have had the opportunity to work closely on the mobile intervention team. I'd like to hear some more about your plans around those types of approaches. I think there's no lack of concern about what's happening on our streets about the behavioral health crisis, both as relates to those who need mental health interventions, but also drug interventions or substance misuse. So if you could tell me a little bit more about kind of how you view the role of police in that moving forward and how you hope to build on the work of the mobile intervention team and how that may coordinate with the mobile crisis team. Thank you.
So when I first got into policing, policing was pretty simple. You went to work, you put handcuffs on people, you take them to jail. You kind of had one solution to the problems. And although we recognized that we've been dealing with those experiencing homelessness or those mental health crisis since the dawn of time, this is not something new. As a profession, we really tried to step back as much as we could. The problem is that we're a 24-hour service and we have contact with everybody that needs a service at 3:00 in the morning because we're the ones working. And over the course of time, it just become very apparent to me that instead of trying to push those activities off to different agencies and entities, that we were the agency that was going to deal with it to some extent, no matter what happens. And so that was kind of the shift of really focusing on mental health and criminal diversion. So without a doubt, there are crimes that people commit, low level, all the way up to very serious crimes that arrests are warranted, jail time is warranted. Low level crimes that are committed impact the economy, they impact businesses. So that's still a piece of the response and always will be. But allowing the police department to have some discretion when they come in contact with people that commit lower level nonviolent crimes to determine whether or not there's a better path for them. Sending everyone to jail is costly, and it's been proven over the years that that's not the answer for everyone in every situation. Right now, our mobile intervention team has spent focused a lot of attention on mental health diversion. So we have an underlying mental health issue. We have lower crimes that are being committed. How do we keep them out of the criminal justice system and provide them with the resources so that we're dealing with the underlying problem? And when I say providing them the resources specifically, we have folks that are in mental health crisis that have access to medical care, but they don't have a driver's license or ID to where they can access that resource. And so we invest time and energy in doing those sorts of things because again, we're available to do it. We have contact with them. And now we're providing them access to something that can address the underlying issue. We're now starting to get into criminal diversion. We've run a couple pilot programs over the last 10 years. The challenge with criminal diversion is you have to have those backup resources available. And the idea of criminal diversion, again, is to provide substance abuse treatment, coming in contact with somebody that wants to enter into substance abuse treatment. It's not the easiest thing to get into in our community, in most communities. And you also have to pick the right time and the right place. So people aren't ready to go to substance abuse treatment all the time. There's a very finite moment in time when you get them where they want to participate. And frequently, the police department happens to be there at that time. So we always want to take advantage of that moment in time. And if we can divert somebody into drug treatment, keep them out of jail, and provide assistance for long-term success, we're going to take advantage of those opportunities as we move forward. When you look at the structure of the police department as a whole, we have a couple of different units that are dedicated to those types of services. So we're still going to perform our patrol functions. We're still going to perform our detective functions and our SWAT functions and all those things. But it's important that we have some units within the police department that really focus on this. And so when I talk about using discretion, that's something that they're familiar with doing because they have contact with populations that can take advantage of diversion on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Assuming you're confirmed on Tuesday night, I have a request I just want to make now. I would really like to get some regular data. We get it for the mobile crisis team, but on kind of the call numbers, the mobile intervention callouts, and the types of issues and needs that they're seeing. I think that's really important for us to get so we kind of get that full spectrum of information. And then to the extent that your team is able to identify gaps along the way so that we're aware of those. I think this is a really important part. I really appreciated your response, though, that patrol detectives and SWAT, our police are still going to do what police do, but that we have this other arm. So I appreciate the answer. Thank you.
So I have like 10 items on my list, but I'm going to hold because I have other people in the queue. First, we have Mr. Rivera, then Mr. Martinez.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have a list, but I'll only go through a few of them now, and then I'll get back in the queue. Chief Designee Case, thanks so much for being here. And I appreciate that the chair scheduled an hour for this. I would encourage that for all of these important hearings that we do have at least an hour for them. So first question that I have for you is, what do you believe is the current status of relations between APD and the community?
I believe the last part was the community as a whole.
Community as a whole, yes.
Well, I think we have a very supportive community to start off. When I travel around and talk to police departments around the country, I think as officers, we're in a great position here in Anchorage because we do have a very, very supportive community. But that doesn't mean that our relationship isn't where I'd like to see it. And I think that's why communication is one of the top priorities that I have. I think over the last couple of years, it's easy to recognize the requests from the community to be more open and communicate about various different topics. Obviously, body-worn cameras is the latest topic that we see a lot of pushback and requests for more information. We're not in a position anymore where we can just say, hey, we can't answer any of these questions because we're the police and we're doing an investigation and we can't provide any of this information. We see around the country that police departments are providing more information to the public. They communicate more through social media channels, as well as direct contact with the media and open forums with the public. And so those are things that we've already started working on. I started doing interviews on the 27th when I was announced and have kind of continued that open communication to today, and we'll continue to do that. So, I look at kind of a community policing model from the standpoint of communication. The information that we provide, the relationships that we create, our willingness to go out into the community, our willingness to have the tough conversation, our willingness to take criticism is going to be the foundation of how we build a better relationship between the police department and the community.
Great, thank you. Next question I have is, I will ask the question, then I'll explain a little bit about why I'm asking it. So do you see the vote that the public took on body-worn cameras as a mandate for accountability and transparency? And the reason that I'm asking this question is that some prior chiefs have had different answers on this. Some of them have had a more of a no lean, more of a yes lean, more of a somewhere in the middle. And depending on where people sit on that spectrum, it's led to their interpretation of how they should craft the body-worn camera policy. So I'd like to hear your perspective as a possible police chief, how you saw that vote on body-worn cameras.
So first of all, I tend to hesitate to use the word transparency and accountability because I think globally there's just, in terms of law enforcement, it kind of looked a little bit negatively. And so it becomes challenging to create policies and create messaging within the police department where that doesn't cause our officers to be really hesitant about the conversation that follows. So I stay away from those words and create policies and communication that that provides that in practicality. So the public's going to tell us whether or not we're being transparent. I'm not going to tell the public that we're being transparent. That's a decision that the public tells us. And so to sort of focus on your question, I think there was certainly a piece of that vote that had to do with transparency because body-worn cameras was a part of that discussion. And I also know that when the municipal manager at the time and the chief at the time was talking about that vote prior to it being on the ballot, there was conversations about body-worn cameras and that was linked to a more open and transparent process between the police department and the public. So that money was obviously used for a multitude of things. We've used it for CAT RMS, which is what it's allowed to be used for. But there were definitely conversations that took place regarding the public being able to view the police department as being more open with the use of body-worn cameras.
Okay, thanks. With respect to everyone else in the queue, I'll go ahead and get out and put myself back in the queue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Rivera. I'll put you back in the queue. Next, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Case, for being with us and for answering our questions and for setting up the meetings with individual members. It's appreciated. You talked a little bit about alternative responses, and I just wanted to ask two areas of questions. First, can you share some thoughts on violence interruption programs, particularly around de-escalation and working with community mediators to prevent retaliatory violence and conflict mediation?
Yes, great question. And I kind of alluded to this a little bit yesterday in the press conference on the latest officer-involved shooting, where we need to do a better job as an agency taking advantage or utilizing or better communicating or having a better relationship with some of our formal and informal leaders within our communities. You know, the great thing about Anchorage is we have, whether it's religious groups, whether it's elders in certain communities or groups that we have that we can take advantage of better communication and from a prevention standpoint. So when you think about violent crime, and the police department coming in after the crime has occurred, we're going to do the investigation. We're going to do what we do as an agency. But the prevention piece, it has to be a cooperative relationship between those community groups, those people that have influence in their communities, and the police department. The police department is not solely responsible. In fact, it's quite challenging to be the sole prevention group, since we're the ones that are enforcing the laws. And so it's important for us to reach out and establish those relationships so that we can build the trust with the intent on taking advantage of prevention. And I know some of these communities that we have here in Anchorage, they're close. They're close knit. They have close ties. They got close family relationships, and we can certainly leverage those relationships to help with prevention of violent crime specifically.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. You know, it's often articulated that we are Alaska's largest village. And in that village relationship, family really matters. And so your point about accessing the resources across our community especially at those root levels, I think is really important, both to prevention and to the de-escalation question. I appreciate that. Look forward to that work. And then I'd also love to hear your thoughts, Chief, on recruitment, particularly around working to move the force forward, both in terms of times of difficulty in hiring and staffing, but also in terms of the police force we want to see as a reflection of our community. I'd love to hear your thoughts on your plans. Thank you.
So recruiting is a challenge. We are recruiting about 300 people for each academy class, or those are the applicant pool that we're looking at. When I got hired, our applicant class was 2,000. So when we talk about increasing our academies and increasing the size of the force from being down 50 officers that we are right now today, the number of people coming into the portal, if you will, or applying for police officer jobs is a fraction of what it was 25 years ago. And so it's not, hey, if we add 25, 50, 100 people to that recruitment pool, we're going to solve our problem. We need to add hundreds of people to that recruitment pool. And that's a job of all of ours. Everybody that's in this room, the media, police department, we all play a role in that. The department has to be a place that not only reflects the community, but is a place that people want to work. And that's going to be a piece of it. This isn't just simply a money issue. This isn't an issue that, just a divine benefit issue. There's a lot of complicated things that are linked to increasing staffing. I wish that I could pull a single lever and we'd have 1,000 applicants and we could solve this problem being down 50 officers in a year. But that's just not the case. And part of that effort is a more diversified workforce. Police departments are across the country. It is not a secret that generally we're a male-dominated field. And so most of our officers are males. And it's also not a secret that we're primarily a white male-dominated field. And so when you try to have a diversified workforce and you're trying to recruit more females, or you're trying to recruit people from the BIPOC community, and you have very few of those employees on the force, it's difficult for a person of color or a female to look at the department and go, oh, I see all of those women or members of the BIPOC community, and therefore I can do the job, or I want to do the job, or it's going to feel comfortable in that environment. And so it is important to have a department that is reflective of the community. Now, in saying that, I will also say that takes a lot of work to recruit when you don't have that representation. And that is pretty much a daily effort. And if the police department's not willing to donate that time and put that effort in, we're going to be sitting here in 3 years and we're going to have this exact same conversation. So, so the success is the time and effort and commitment that we put into it.
I appreciate the answers, and thank you for the expression of the intentionality. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much. I have myself in the queue next. A couple easy ones, I think. There was some reporting that previously the SWAT team was not wearing body-worn cameras. What's the status?
As of July 1, they're wearing body-worn cameras in their SWAT capacity.
Thank you. So the policies that you have published online, generally speaking, you did something great for me the very first day. You remember what you did?
No.
You published the table of contents
Oh.
of the policies, because previously, up until July 1, you couldn't search the policies. There was no table of contents. There was no way to access it except for go document by document by document to try to figure out which of those 200 or more documents are the one you need. Now they're available. So thank you for that. I have a whole list. I'll try to narrow in, and I think it's a good practice for folks to ask maybe 2 questions and roll, or less if you don't have to. So you were just talking about workforce shortages, and we have a history. If you've been in Anchorage long enough, you remember when workforce shortages boil around, you lose your specialized teams because people have to go on patrol. So what's the status of that, and what's the kind of prognosis, if you will, in the short term of how we're going to manage through the shortage?
It's a great question, timely. We had a command meeting just yesterday with all of our non-sworn managers and lieutenants and above to talk about that very issue. And on the table is, again, exactly what you mentioned. Do we need to get rid of some of our specialty units so that we can put those bodies in patrol? And I anticipated that being a challenging question for the command staff, because opportunities within the police department that keeps morale high. That it keeps, when you work this job and you do it day in and day out like some other jobs, and you don't have the opportunity to go out and see the community in a different light, in a different position, that can kind of wear on you. So there's hesitation for sure of getting rid of units. But we have a set number of how many patrol officers we need as a drop dead minimum to provide just adequate services, which is not the bar that we want to have. And once we get, or we are approaching that number, the potential for moving some bodies around or shrinking units, that has to be a reality. But But some of the things that came up is, part-time workforce can impact that, which is not an opportunity right now. The ability to maybe change shifting or hours worked is not something that we have available to us now that potentially could provide a better work start and stop time and better overlaps where they need to be. So those are just a couple of the ideas of how we can make up some of that shortage, but that's temporary. If we continue to lose bodies and we're not putting enough in to make progress, no matter what we do today, in a year from now, the only solution is going to be to break down certain units. I mean, at the end of the day, the base function of the police department is to have a patrol response and to have detectives to investigate crimes. And then from there, you build out to do some of the things we do. The problem with shrinking units in size is they become ineffective. And so, my mobile intervention team, they shrink down to 1 or 2 officers and clinicians. They're still doing good work, but they're almost ineffective because what they're going to be doing is just going call to call, taking some calls off of patrol. They're not able to do any of the more in-depth stuff like providing people with identifications so they can get medical insurance, and doing follow-up so that we reduce the calls for service and reduce crisis. They're not able to engage in those type of activities. So we're hesitant about reducing the size of units unless we absolutely have to.
Yeah, that's a real concern for me. I remember when we had robust gang units, we had all kinds of units that were out there doing work, and it's been a long time. Okay, so my second question before I yield back to the queue, it's like, which one do I ask? We have ASP, which is a great service, but in my mind, it's a service that is a cognate to EMS mostly. It responds to light medical issues, if you will, people who are in crisis in the streets who need some services relating to addiction and other issues because they're in trouble in the streets. There's no parallel to that on the police side, where we would have kind of a non-sworn light duty police allied effort. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about how to navigate the non-sworn part of the job, because in the past that also was a big element that was supportive of the mission of keeping public safety in the community.
So our professional staff is extremely important. We are able to fill the professional staff rank a lot easier than the sworn ranks right now. By the end of the year, we're going to be close to being completely staffed on the, so we're talking about dispatchers, records clerks, evidence techs, IT. Those positions are going to be pretty close to be fully staffed by the end of the year. I believe that we can hire non-sworn professional staff at a much rapid rate, and we can take advantage. And there's a lot of people that want to be involved with the police department. They want to work for the police department in some capacity. They just don't want to put on a gun and badge. So what we're working on right now is we have a classification called community service officers. We have 4 of those positions currently on the department. And we have always hired from within. So a dispatcher wants to become a CSO. We do an internal posting and they take that job. It's never been a public posting. We have converted some positions and created 9 additional CSO positions right now that we hope to post any day now. That is the start of the conversation on how we use our non-sworn professional staff to take some of the duties off of sworn. So right now our CSOs have their peace officers by code. And so they can write parking tickets, they can impound vehicles, all the vehicles, the junk vehicles and the vehicles that prevent snow removal. Those are CSOs that come out and impound those vehicles. So they have limited police authority. And of course they've got our computers and the radios, so they're tied into us. And there's a multitude of areas that they can impact the community and increase our response time and increase our effectiveness. The first is more of them doing the job they currently do is helpful. So they can be at a traffic collision scene and they can do perimeter work, which means now I have a patrol officer that's back in service, handling calls for service while they do that. We're exploring what types of crimes they can respond to. So, old burglaries or thefts where people are gone, where there's very, very low risk that they're going to be involved in some sort of, physical or have contact with a suspect or a defendant they're going to have to arrest, but they can do the investigation. They can collect evidence. We're exploring those options. our CAP team, which has already been mentioned. There's no reason why we can't add professional staff to that CAP team, because some of the duties that they perform can be done by a peace officer instead of a police officer. We also are exploring how we kind of model this community policing in terms of having officers that are connected to a geographical area in Anchorage. That doesn't always have to be a police officer that's in charge of that geographical area. So if you think from an elected body, from a community standpoint, having an officer or a CSO connected to a neighborhood or an area. So when we have non-emergency or non-police immediate response, we have somebody that the community can go to and say, I've got a problem location that's a reoccurring noise complaint. Is there something that you guys can do? Now you have that person that connects you to the police department. Sometimes that needs to be an officer, and sometimes that can be a member of the professional staff. And in the last area that we're looking into is detectives. Not every detective case needs to be investigated by a gun and badge. And again, if we can fill those ranks with professional staff to do some or parts of those investigations, now we're making up for the 50 officers that we're short.
So 50 is the number.
50 today is what
Thank
we're
you.
down sworn.
All right, I'm going to yield back. I have a number of other questions but Mr. Salt is in the queue.
Excellent. Thank you. Chief Case and I met this morning, so he answered a lot of my questions. But I did think of one additional one. So I know yourself and Officer Cross were kind of caught up in a little transition, I say politics between administrations. But I'm curious, where does Officer Cross fit in your administration, or have you had a chance to sit down and talk with her about her future roles?
Yeah, I met with her before July 1, and then I meet with all of the captains. We have 4 captains every morning, so I see her every day. And she currently is in the captain of detective, which is where she was prior to taking the chief position. And she has a place in the department. We've talked about a couple different places for in the department that I'm always open, willing for her to take those positions. She was promoted to captain of detectives because of her years of service as a detective, her knowledge of the detective division. She's greatly qualified for that position. That's why she got promoted into it. She's very good at that position. And so, it's up to her what she wants to do moving forward. But, there's been, as far as I'm concerned, no issues since I've come back, and she's assumed her responsibility. She's actually out in training right now, and she's still working from training and running her division from afar. So, I've always been pleased with her work.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salt. Next, I'm going to skip Mr. Rivera to Mr. Johnson, and we'll come back up. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Chief. So we have a lot of people reaching out to us, and they have concerns about either delay or limited police response to property crimes, some of what you might call lower level crimes, theft, shoplifting, vandalism, things like that. And, cumulatively, we do see the impacts they're having on neighborhoods and local businesses and all that. And I think part of what I'm getting at, you may have already spoken to, because the reality is there are some constraints when you have limited manpower, right? And sometimes you have to triage things. If you have to choose between responding to a property crime versus a person crime, it's got to be the person crime, right? But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on if there's more you think APD could be doing on that front with the resources you have. Is it just this is our present reality and our officers are too busy to respond to things of nature? Are there other things we can be doing at the community level that you think would be impactful there? What do you see as a path forward to improving our ability to address these?
Staffing's a big issue. Right off the top, our calls are put in priority. And so those misdemeanor crimes, like lower level property crimes, do tend to get down the stack with priority. But with that being said, I think the diversion piece of it is a realistic response, because, again, some of the reasons why some of those lower crimes are being committed is because of underlying issues. And if we can commit resources to allowing those diversion channels to take place, then in addressing the underlying issue, hopefully we can reduce those numbers. I think housing, the effort that we've seen and been very productive as of late in terms of housing and decommissioning, if you will, some of these camps, that also contributes to a decrease in those types of crime. And staffing throughout the entire municipality. And it's not just government, it's all private practice, private corporation, same thing. We're all struggling for staffing. And so it becomes a challenge to prosecute those crimes when we do have somebody that's arrested, when domestic violence is higher on the list, in terms of the municipality and other crimes like that. So staffing around the municipality are going to also make a positive impact on that. But if we were fully staffed, our response time would be much quicker. And we'd also be able to expand some of the, traditional policing resources, as well as kind of that expansion that I've been talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So now the only one who hasn't asked a question, and asking questions are not mandatory, Mr. Littlefield. If you want it in the queue, it's yours anytime. So you are the only one.
I just got a quick question. Thank you, Chair. Looking through your resume, and I have something that just threw me off, and I don't understand what it means. If you could elaborate on it, from February 2020 to current, police practice consultant contractor and Dago Law Group. Can you elaborate on that? Because it's new to me.
Sure. So there's a law firm based out of Connecticut that does legal work for police departments, generally police departments, not the actual individual employees. And that firm focuses on constitutional-based policing. So they have contracts for looking at investigations of departments around the country, policy development, looking at use of force investigations, SWAT operations. So they're an overall police practice law firm that looks at, investigates as a part of federal consent decrees. And so I've done, although I probably will not do that anymore in this position, but up until now, I've done contract work with that law firm. So that's how I've do teaching around the country and look at policy review and develop policies for agencies around the country. So I've got, departments that I've worked with from coast to coast. So, and I got into that field because, we're secluded here in Alaska. And so we sometimes we spin around, particularly in law enforcement, where we don't like change. We do kind of the same thing over and over again. And so that just has allowed me to have a broad exposure and experience to agencies around the country, things that are happening in these agencies, solutions that they've come up with, and adapt them to APD. So it's contract work, working in my primary area that I focus on is use of force issues and internal affairs investigations.
Thank you very much.
So we're down to about 28 minutes, 18 minutes, and we're now in the second round through the queue. So it's lightning round, one question each, if you don't mind. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So then, I guess if I only have one question, I'll ask this one. So I have a question particularly around an issue that's important in Midtown, and I want to get your sense of what you have been doing and then what you would do if you were appointed as chief of police. And that's particularly around Fairbanks Street. So Fairbanks Street is an issue that I get communications from constituents on a daily basis. I don't think I really have to describe it to you, Chief Designee Case. You probably know all about it. But, I am curious about how you as chief of police would look at that situation, analyze it, and sort of figure out a path forward to deal with the myriad of issues, knowing that you are sort of one of multiple agencies that would interact on Fairbanks Street.
It's going to be a little bit long-winded because there's a lot to that piece. So I'll start by saying that what we are going to do in the future is we want to have a homeless outreach team that's focused on making sure that things that are impacting the homeless community that are police problems. So primarily we're talking about victimization, we're talking about crimes, And then there's also some other issues that pop up that we can address because we have things like CAP and mobile intervention team. We want those things to ensure they come our way. And because of the relationship and the partnerships with the other areas of the city, like the health department or nonprofits, those things that are not police problems, but we come across, we're able to push those to the entities that best perform those functions. And so in a perfect world, that's how that ecosystem works. When you have an area or a camp area that has a lot of problems at the same time, where we have some of our nonprofits or some of the resources that are available do not want to go in and provide those because the environment, isn't conducive to walk around and it possibly is not safe. The goal here is to break the camp up, to get the trash cleaned up, to partner with Parks and Recs, to deal with the victimization, the criminal pieces of the activity, and separate that camp. So people kind of go in various different directions. And some of that is housing. Some of that is to a smaller camp. So it's easier to address the issues in the smaller camps than it is in a camp that's extremely large. Shelter's a piece of it. So the more dangerous it is, the more we're going to be leaning on the side of traditional law enforcement services to break those down so that it's a smaller, more manageable group to engage with. The smaller the size of the camp, the more we're going to be on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is partnering with our agencies to try to assist with, whether it's providing housing or making sure people get into treatment or medication use, things like that. So it's kind of two separate ends of the challenge of homelessness that we have right now.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Alto.
Thank you. So I wanted to bring your attention to an old resolution. It's AR number 2020-339 as amended. I really would like to see this resolution implemented. And this is around policies and procedures with APD. And it really provides the opportunity to communicate any changes to policies and procedures through the mayor's office and have them either referred to the Public Safety Advisory Commission. And I know we're working on some revamping of that commission as a body or through the Chief Equity Officer. And so I just wanted to draw your attention to that. I think it's important. It's a little bit hard to track changes on policies and procedures unless they're made very public, like we're talking about with body worn cameras. And there's a lot of public interest in what the policies and procedures I think are for the police department. So I would just ask if you could please review the resolution. You may remember how it came about, and that we get that opportunity to really improve the transparency, I think, which is really important between how the police department operates, especially if they're making changes to those operations. Thank you.
Okay. That's good. So I just which is the question that I want to get on the table? So many. I think I'll ask this first, and if there's another opportunity, I'll ask my second. So what is APD's part in providing a solution towards the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people in Alaska?
So we have two different commissions that we participate in. There's one that's the U.S. Attorney's Office kind of starts and originates and meets every month. And then we have the governor's commission that he created, I want to say 2 years ago. I sat on that one. And then we have members of our department that sits on the U.S. Attorney's and FBI's commission that meets regularly. So we participate in that. A lot of the issues around that subject have been focused a lot on some of the challenges in rural Alaska, less so focused on the issues in kind of more of an urban environment. Our response to missing people in general is a pretty robust system. Our homicide unit looks at every missing person report and keeps track of them and maintains them so that that we can ensure that people aren't missing for long periods of time and nobody's doing anything or nobody's doing any follow-up. So we have a lot of the pieces in place that both of those groups have brought out and highlighted as challenges in the community. I think part of it is communication. So when we have such a transient population, just because we're the hub, and they come into Alaska or come into Anchorage for, let's just say medical services or whatever brings them to Anchorage, and then they end up going missing. The biggest challenge for us is then they slip through the cracks. And sometimes the missing report comes so late that, it's hard to start tracking down. Like the last known time was a month earlier, and our starting place is nowhere. So that's kind of the biggest challenge that we have here in Anchorage, is just that delay in reporting. And so where to kind of start. And so people slipping through the cracks that are missing, particularly with our Alaska Native population, is probably the biggest concern that we have right now. But generally, I think we're doing a pretty good job, but we're continuing to participate. We're also had a grant to provide additional training recently to all of our patrol division as it relates to that topic as well.
That last part's important. It's great to participate in state and federal, but if we don't have a local branch of that effort, then maybe we're missing something. Thank you. That's great. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So last question that I will ask, promise. But I want to ask a general question about the relationship between the police department in the assembly. I asked you previously about the police department and the community. And this specifically is around policies, which I think is a good follow-up to the question that Member Zolotel asked. I know we have a work session coming up on next Friday, on the body-worn camera draft policy that the administration has put out. But I just want to get your sense sort of generally, and especially considering in the last several years, I think really since 2020, the Assembly has provided a variety of opinions, guidance on policy for APD. And I just wanted to get your sense of how you see that relationship between the Assembly and APD from that policy perspective.
So I'll start by giving you my impression as to why we've had an increase in formal Assembly opinions when it comes to the policy decision. My sense is that with a lack of conversation between the chief of police and the Assembly, that leads to written documentation, asking questions and wanting clarification, wanting input. So the first answer is, if I do my job and meet with you frequently enough and provide enough information and answer enough questions, that we can probably deal with a lot of that on the front end. I think the body-worn camera policy draft that we just drafted is a perfect example. We want to provide that to the elected body before it goes out in public format as part of the conversation. We want to engage in conversation based on that draft policy. Myself and Eva have been open to meeting with all of the members and answering the questions. And so I think that's where it starts. Anytime we can stay away from the formal process because we've taken care of it, on a relational level, is kind of where I'd prefer to be. I'm certainly going to be open about these things. These policies are not secret. They're going to be posted on our website anyway. And so to me, it seems a little bit ridiculous that we don't have the conversation before the policies are posted or when changes are going to be made. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that type of interaction from the police department as it relates to the elected body.
Great, thank you.
All right, so Mr. Martinez, then myself in the queue. Go ahead, George.
Thank you, Chair. I may have missed this, but Chief, if I did, just please refresh me. And if I hadn't, let's just discuss your vision for language access. I know you've been around for a while, and I was involved in the municipality's early efforts to bring robust language access across, especially with respect to the front-facing first responders. Could you discuss a little bit about your plans for language access and making sure that our diverse community can have effective responsiveness to the language challenges that we may have in the community? Thank you.
Yeah, this has been a topic we've been working on progressively with technologies, is primarily why it's been progressing over about the last decade. And from 10 years ago, roughly, to today, the amount that we've learned within the police department in terms of direct communication with language. So somebody that is on scene providing some sort of interpreter service versus what now has become kind of the norm around the country, which is an online platform or something that we can do from our cell phone. There's a big difference between the two. And so whether it be sign language or our multitude of different languages that we speak in Anchorage, what we have done through training and through acquiring some technological platforms for the last couple of years is slowing the officers down, trying to get somebody physically there as an interpreter. 10 years ago, even, we were using family members sometimes for interpreters, which has long since been the practice. So we've come a long way. But I think the biggest takeaway that we've learned is, although we can use some of these platforms and they are helpful in emergency, it is important to try to have somebody on scene that can interpret for these particular incidences.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I have myself here. So I'm going to talk about a couple of specific issues, but I'm not interested in issues related to the specific. I'm using it as an example to think about for other things. We received some pretty robust public input relating to your history on a specific matter relating to sex workers and sex trafficking from a long time ago. And so I'm not interested on that policy per se, but here's the question, just thinking about who you are, where you've been, and where you're going. How have you evolved as an officer since your career started 20 years ago or 23 years ago?
So I started over 25 years ago now in LA as a barely 21-year-old. And as I mentioned earlier, this job was about arresting people, putting them in jail, and go to the next call. And that was the culture I was raised in when I started doing this work. And when I came back home to Alaska, I continued that model, if you will. And it was kind of interesting because there was a training course that was offered, and in briefing, it was put out, who wants to attend this course? And of course, my young, energetic hand went up, and the older folks sit in the back and the newer folks sit in the front. And the older folks in the back let me know that I just need to put my hand down. I haven't been here long enough. But there was one thing that I could do that didn't matter how much seniority I had in the department, and that was I could take advantage of the education benefit that we had. And so the next semester I was back in school for my master's program. It's a criminology program, and specifically my thesis in that program focused on how a single police contact impacts overall opinions about the police department, as well as fear of crime. And so when you spend 2.5 years studying that sort of data and that sort of research, your mind kind of goes into a different frame of thought. So understanding that a theory of policing where it's all about the arrest and jail and on to the next call, and then you understand the impact that we have as a law enforcement community and how a single contact completely changes the fear that individual has about crime in general, regardless of what the actual crime stats say, and overall opinions about police based on that one single contact. And that's even true today, years later, with social media. So we can put a whole host of negative stuff out about law enforcement or police officers, but it's still that single contact that we as human beings use as our reference point. And so as I progressed through my career, that kind of became the cornerstone. And where I look at it, where I am right now, it's all about the individual that's in front of you. we used to say, hey, we don't care who the person is in front of us. We're going to provide the same level of policing to every person. And, it takes time to understand that really what should be said is we absolutely care about the person that's in front of us, because we are going to change the way we communicate, or how much time we're going to spend with them, or what we're going to provide and help them with based on who they are, what their experiences are, and what expectation they have of the police department. So I think over the course of time, it's become a very individual based, one-on-one, what that relationship is. The vision of the Anchorage Police Department is to create an environment where everybody matters. And that may seem like a little bit of an unusual vision for a police department. Certainly a difficult vision to accomplish, because we arrest people, we write people tickets. But the fact of the matter is that our contacts with certain members of our community, they may not have felt like they've mattered ever in their life or recently. And we have that unique opportunity to create that interaction, that communication. I'll tell you about a commendation we got a couple of years ago where a gentleman gives a commendation for an officer. Officer doesn't even remember this contact at all. His car broke down on the side of the road, and an officer stopped by, checked in, see if he had a cell phone, had a contact. The gentleman that was writing in identified himself as a multiple-time felon who had a lot of negative interactions with the police department. His family had negative interaction with the police department. And he writes in a commendation for an officer stopping just to check to see if he was okay. And he said what I've just said that summed it up, which is, my opinion about the Anchorage Police Department is so much different after the way that officer treated me, who is, again, a multi-felon. And that's a positive contact. And that person felt a little different about himself, as well as the Anchorage Police Department, after that contact. So I'd say that's a long-winded answer, but you asked a tough one, so I gave you more of an in-depth answer.
All right. That's great. So that brings us to the end of our scheduled time. This matter will be before us on Tuesday on the consent agenda. And with that, we will stand adjourned. Thank you. We'll be convening again in 10 minutes.